Good morning to all our participants and of course to our distinguished panelists and speakers. Thank you everyone for joining us. On behalf of the other members of the Board of Directors at the Indo-Pacific Centre, good morning, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to our inaugural webinar. The Indo-Pacific Centre has been established during a particularly tumultuous time in the world, with COVID-19 having changed the way we all work and we live. We find ourselves in an increasingly polarized world. However, this is what we at the Indo-Pacific Centre really wish to rectify. I'm not sure how many of you know, but the Indo-Pacific Centre was actually the vision of Mr. C. Gunasingham, the late Mr. C. Gunasingham, who was a diplomat who served as Sri Lanka's first High Commissioner to Singapore and economic advisor to Sri Lankan President J.R. Jayawardena. He conceptualized a world that was interconnected with the Indian Ocean at its very core, at the core of all trade and business. And it's a vision we are sure will play out in the coming years. His daughter, a Singapore corporate lawyer, Shamila Gunasingham, who is also a member, of course, of the IPC board, has been instrumental in bringing his vision to life. And Shamila is in attendance of the webinar this morning. The Centre really strives to build bridges and links across countries, industries, and stakeholder groups. And today, of course, it's the first of that collaboration in action. I'd just like to quickly thank Scott Campbell, President of the Howard Baker Forum, and Bill Deckerman and Mark Hughes of DXC Technology for their support and enabling this collaboration to take place. I'd also like to thank members of our board and advisory council who are participating in the webinar today. So we have Professor Rohan Gunaratna and President Mohammed Wahid for taking the time to be part of today's session. A quick few words about Professor Gunaratna, who will be the moderator for this webinar today. He is the Professor of Security Studies at the Nanyang Technological University here in Singapore. And Professor Gunaratna is a highly sought after trainer for national security agencies, law enforcement authorities, and military counterterrorism units in conflict zones globally. He has been a great supporter of the Centre, and we are most grateful to him for his efforts. With that, I turn you over to Professor Gunaratna, who will introduce today's topic, as well as our distinguished speakers, and guide us through the event today. Over to you, Professor Gunaratna.
Thank you, Divya. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Singapore. Good evening, United States. Welcome to the inaugural event of the Indo-Pacific Centre of Singapore. As thinkers and practitioners, we meet today to address the most pressing challenge of our time. The pandemic presents an apex national and international security challenge, and during this period, the Indo-Pacific Centre has convened this meeting to focus on the cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific in a post-COVID world. Some of the best minds in cybersecurity from Japan, Singapore, India, UK, and US are with us. Our distinguished speakers include Gaurav Kirti, the Deputy Chief Executive Development of the Cyber Security Agency of Singapore. Then, of course, from India, we have, and we are honored to have, General Rajesh Pant, the National Cyber Coordination Center Chief. And from Japan, we have Hirai Hirohito, who is the Director General, Commerce and Information Policy Bureau of METI in Japan. Let me make a request to all of you. That is, we are going to have these distinguished speakers, and after that, we are going to have Mark Hughes, who is going to give us a cyber demo of an attack that was a cyber attack that was prevented by DXC. my request to you is that all of you should turn your Zoom settings to active speaker view. Let me also ask you to use the Q&A box for your questions. Now, in order to introduce the first two speakers, let me turn to Scott Campbell, the president of the Harvard Baker Forum, and Bill Deckerman, who is the executive vice president and general counsel at DXC Technologies. The Harvard Baker Forum, ladies and gentlemen, is a public policy partner and DXC Technology Global Technology Partner of the Indo-Pacific Centre. Now, Scott Campbell is a strategic advisor of Baker Donaldson, a law firm based in Washington, D.C. And as I mentioned, he is also a very active individual who is working in a number of fields in energy, homeland security, technology, trade, and foreign direct investments. I have had the pleasure of knowing Scott for more than 30 years. In fact, first when I met him, I was in the UK, and I worked very closely with him many years ago. So I want to tell you that he's a remarkable man who has done much for the security and safety of this world. Let me also tell you that our speaker, Bill Deckerman, he is Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of DXC Technology. Mr. Deckerman is going to speak to us on cybersecurity, data governance, and also privacy concerns. And he has had a very illustrious career holding global responsibility over all legal activities for DXC Technology. Over to you, Scott and Bill.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you very much. And thank you, Diva, as well. It is very good to be together, at least virtually, with you both, and especially with my longtime friend, who was, I guess, the world's greatest terrorism expert, the global strategic thinker, and man of action, Professor Rohan Gunaratne, who I've known, for, as he said, for so many years. And it's a pleasure for us at the Howard Baker Forum to have this opportunity to collaborate with the new Indo-Pacific Centre in Singapore. The Howard Baker Forum was established 14 years ago by the former United States Senator, former U.S. Ambassador to Japan, former Reagan White House Chief of Staff, Senator Howard Baker. Now, Senator Baker was an iconic figure. He was a great conciliator and architect of practical solutions in Washington for over 40 years, a big internationalist and believed in international cooperation. He saw the need for platforms like the Baker Forum and now the Indo-Pacific Centre as essential catalyst for thoughtful policy dialogue and problem solving. He used to speak of them as bridges for ideas to cross over into action. And he saw a need for the realistic set of national priorities through international cooperation with programs to deliver workable solutions. He was a remarkable man. Early on, he recognized the challenges of cybercrime and cybersecurity, which have become much more pronounced, shall we say, since his passing, and seem to proliferating compound daily. Today, we are acutely aware of the global nature and scope of cybercriminality and its shocking penetration of public and private digital systems. As you know, here in the United States, we just suffered a mega cyber attack on our government, so large, so prolific, so invasive, that it will take months, if not years, to fully understand its scope and damage, and to close all of its points of entry. A great tragedy for our national security community. And like COVID-19 and its variants, hacking and malware have become scourges of our time, cyber pandemic, if you will, in desperate need of creative strategies and effective defensive measures, which we'll talk about through our very distinguished speakers today. We've come at the Howard Baker Forum to appreciate the global scope of cybercrime through our collaborations with DXC Technology, which confronts these problems for private and public clients all over the world every day, it seems. And we've become especially aware of cybercrime in the Indo-Pacific, which of course has become the center of global growth, for the world, and with that, a giant target for the world's most sophisticated cyber criminals. So today's webinar is just the beginning of our collaboration with the Indo-Pacific Centre. Will lead to deeper dives into cybercrime and the defensive measures that are being taken by the leading nations of this most robust region of the world, the Indo-Pacific. So our thanks to the Indo-Pacific Centre and to the creative leadership of its co-founder, Sharmila Gunsingham, for hosting this event and for bringing such a distinguished group of speakers to address a most urgent subject for us all. So thank you all from all over the world for joining this important conversation. Now I'll turn it over to our technology partner, to Bill Deckelman of DXC Technology.
Okay, great. So let me add my thanks as well and welcome to all the attendees. And this is a great honor for us at DXC to be part of this inaugural webinar as well. And it's great to have such a distinguished moderator and special guest speakers as well. So welcome everyone. And I'll just say, as a member of the private sector and the technology segment in particular, DXC has a very strong interest in sponsoring and fostering dialogue on cybersecurity challenges. And like many of you, probably all of you, we believe that for this type of dialogue to be effective, it really needs to be global and it needs to be multi-stakeholder, and including not only governments, but international bodies, NGOs, academia, and think tanks, in addition to the private sector. And we've really seen recently, in recent years, an increasing receptivity to including the private sector in these discussions. And we at DXC want to do our part in encouraging more and more of the private sector to become involved in these dialogues. We had the privilege of participating in the December 2019 consultative meeting of the UN open-ended working group that's dealing with these cybersecurity challenges. And by the way, a group co-chaired by David Koh, the Chief Executive Officer of the CSA of Singapore. So this was the first time that this body had invited the private sector and NGOs and think tanks and academia into and to directly participate in the UN session with the other nation state members. So it was a very interesting experience. There were over 100 private sector organizations that presented in the meeting, and many of us were able to offer our thoughts to the session. And then we had the opportunity to listen to many of the member states present as well. And we covered a lot of topics. We covered cyber threat landscape and emerging threats. We talked about the rules and laws and norms of cyberspace. And of course, we talked about capacity and confidence building measures. So it was a very interesting session, and I think everyone was pleasantly surprised by the effectiveness of it and the outcome of the trying out the new format of inviting the private sector in. So it's been an amazing, past few years. I think collectively across the globe, we've made quite a bit of progress in many areas. But for those of you who are involved in this, I know you know that there's still a long way to go. And these are very complex issues that we're dealing with. So the solutions don't come quickly and they don't come easily. But we also know that the only way that we're going to have progress is to have these kinds of dialogues. And they need to be global, and they need to be very open and candid. And we all need to hear the perspectives of others as they're coming to the table for the dialogue. So that's why we're so pleased to be part of this Indo-Pacific endeavor with the center, and really looking forward to today's session. So thank you again. And with that, Professor, I will turn it over to you, I believe.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Scott. And I want to thank both of you for the good work that all of you do. Let me introduce our first distinguished speaker, Mr. Gaurav Kirti of Singapore's Cybersecurity Agency. Brigadier General Kirti is the Deputy Chief Executive of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, covering the capability and ecosystem development portfolio. And he's from the Republic of Singapore Armed Forces before he joined CSA, and he's a very decorated Air Force pilot and a chief innovation officer. So I'm personally a great admirer of Gaurav Kirti. He has reached certain heights, and we all want to see him do more for Singapore and for the world. We are very honored to have you at this inaugural event. Gaurav.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that excessively gracious introduction. I'm now very scared to speak because I feel like anything I say after this might be a letdown for people after such a wonderful introduction. But I'm very grateful and pleased to join all of you today at the Indo-Pacific Centre's very first event. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate Professor Gunaratna and Ms. Hunlani on the inauguration of this center. I've been asked to share Singapore's perspective to hopefully add to the insights that have already been shared and the ones that we're about to hear from India and Japan. I think it's quite apt that we're all here to share our perspectives and discuss this very important topic of cybersecurity over Zoom. This is a prime example of how we've been able to tackle the challenges and obstacles that COVID has imposed on us and thrown at us using digital technologies. For Singapore, our digitalization journey is embodied by the Smart Nation ambition. And for those of you who are familiar with it, it's basically our plan to use technology and equip citizens with technology to make life better, to harness the opportunities that digital technology provides to improve the lives of our citizens and maintain our competitive edge in the global economy. We basically live in an era where everything is digital by default now. Smartphones, smartwatches, smart home appliances. We even have robot vacuums that clean our homes for us. So it's growing, and it's something that's an opportunity. And Singapore loves to set ambitious, audacious targets for itself, and we did exactly that for digitization. COVID-19 set an even more ambitious target for us and accelerated all of our plans to digitize even beyond our most ambitious targets. So in the last 1 year alone, we've accelerated our adoption of various technologies to a level that we had not predicted. We implemented, so shortly after the COVID outbreak last year, we implemented a 2-month-long circuit breaker, which is akin to other countries' use of the term lockdown. Stringent movement restrictions, closure of schools, workplaces for non-essential sectors and services. And in response to that, schools turned to home-based learning and virtual lessons. Enterprises and organizations moved to remote working and bringing their service offerings online. Even the government rolled out a number of digital solutions such as Safe Entry and Trace Together to help with digital contact tracing. So it would be an understatement to say that COVID-19 has changed the way that we live, work, and play, pivoting us from physical activities to digital activities like telecommuting, e-learning, online shopping, video calls like this, online food delivery, and digital platforms. I'm reminded of that meme that goes sent around WhatsApp, attributing digital transformation of organizations not to the CEOs, not to the CTOs, not to the chief innovation officers, but to COVID-19. And while it was amusing, it is also a little bit tragic, especially as a former CIO myself. But what's relevant to organizations and society is that as we reopen our economy, these digital activities are here to stay. It's the new normal. There is no rewinding any of this. It's going to become more deeply embedded in our lives. And the question is how we embody that use of digital technologies in our physical life again. But this whole burst of digitization has been Janus-faced. It's been two-faced. It's been opportunities, but also risks. It has increased our attack surface and exposed us to more cyber threats, especially because so much of it was done hastily without emphasis on security, because speed was of the essence. I'm reminded of a story early on in the circuit breaker period where almost all Singaporeans would buy their groceries online. And prior to this whole COVID-19 period, the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, like many other agencies, had a robust framework for identifying critical information infrastructures, CIIs. What are the essential services that are digitally run that are necessary to keep society functioning? We had identified electricity, water, the common things that most countries would identify. We had never, ever, ever thought that online grocery shopping would be one of them. And in the period of the lockdown, there was a short period where one of the major online grocery shops went down, the website went down. And ordinarily, if a e-commerce website for a grocery store goes down, CSA would say, all right, these are the few steps you can do, and we shrug our shoulders because it's a private website. But during that context of COVID-19, when ordinary Singaporeans depended on online grocery deliveries, things were different. So we saw the impact of that reliance on digital technology, and we saw the cybersecurity threats. So as we embrace the benefits of digitalization, we have to be mindful to prioritize security. And if security is not high on the priority list and insecure technologies are adopted, or technologies are adopted in an insecure way, they will pose great risks to the organizations and individuals using them. As a simple other example, in April last year, when schools in Singapore adopted home-based learning initiatives, they used teleconferencing applications to conduct virtual classes. Very sensible. But because they didn't do it securely and they didn't understand the security settings of the platforms they used, hackers were easily able to hijack an online geography lesson, and they sent a class of school students, young students, obscene pictures and lewd messages. In response, the Ministry of Education had to suspend the use of that application for home-based learning until new security measures were incorporated to prevent such incidents from occurring. Even as we take the necessary precautions, we see that cyber threats continue to evolve. Attacks are becoming more sophisticated and more difficult to detect. If I had given this speech 2 months ago, it would have been a very different speech. But a recent incident that shook the cybersecurity community is the SolarWinds hack, where attackers performed a sophisticated attack to insert malicious code into certain trusted SolarWinds Orion software updates. These updates were made available to customers and allowed the attacker to gain access to customer network environments where the updates were applied. With this access, the attacker was able to create new accounts, evade common means of detection, obtain sensitive data, move across networks unnoticed, and establish additional persistence mechanisms. Who knows what else? As reported by the media, SolarWinds clients include US government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, including Microsoft, Cisco Systems, VMware, companies that are renowned for their own security. All in all, we think it affected about 18,000 customers, although a much smaller number were compromised by follow-on activity on their systems. So those are the advanced attackers. But even the unsophisticated attacks have increased. Cyber criminals have capitalized on this digital trend, and this is reflected in the increase in cybercrime globally as well as in Singapore. The Singapore Police Force reported an increase in online scams in 2020, with e-commerce scams increasing by 73%, almost 2,000 compared to 1,000 in the same period the previous year. And about 300 of those involved COVID-19 related items, such as face masks, hand sanitizers, and thermometers. Cyber criminals are preying on the fears of their victims. In line with the global rise in ransomware in 2020, we also observed a sharp uptick in the number of ransomware incidents reported to us, with the rise in local cases reported coinciding with the start of the circuit breaker period. We observed more than 1,500 malicious phishing URLs targeting Singapore between March and May, which was during that period of the circuit breaker. And this was more than double the number from the preceding 3 months. Of note, and especially devious, was a phishing campaign that targeted our postal system, or targeted people who used our postal system for deliveries. It took advantage of the fact that many people had turned to online shopping during the circuit breaker, and it tricked victims into providing their credit card details by impersonating our postal company, informing victims that their parcels had been stopped at the depot, and requiring a payment for a small fee before the victims could receive their parcel. It looked very legitimate. They had sophisticated websites set up to receive the information, and the criminals used clever social engineering, leveraging this new context of online shopping to make their victims fall prey. This just emphasizes the importance of cybersecurity. The risks associated with digitalization are unavoidable, but they can be mitigated, and that's the whole point. If they implement strong security measures, you practice good cyber hygiene, we think cybersecurity is and will continue to be a key enabler, which will allow us to enjoy the full benefits of digitalization. Security cannot be an afterthought, but instead it should be integrated in the design of the new technologies and tools from the onset. Digitalization without security is a hazard. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's like a car without brakes. It's a lot of fun when things are going well, but it's really dangerous when you need to avoid an obstacle. To this end, Singapore government is taking a multi-pronged approach to deal with the issue from different angles, and this is where I hope our perspective can add some value to the conversation. We've taken a slightly different approach. We start very much upstream, firstly. We invest in talents and knowledge in order to understand the threats of emerging technology with research and development. We partner with our local universities and companies' R&D labs to understand and solve pressing challenges, and then help translate them aggressively into innovative solutions for customers and agencies. Second, we've actually reviewed our approach to cybersecurity by treating it more as a public utility that citizens rely on, just like water or electricity. It's not just a private sector offering, it's something that the government has a responsibility to clean up before providing. CSA launched Singapore's Safer Cyberspace Master Plan, which outlines a blueprint for creation of a safer and more secure cyberspace in Singapore. There are 3 strategic trusts, which I'll expand on a little bit. The first one is securing our core national digital infrastructure. The second is safeguarding our cyber activities. And the third is empowering our cyber-savvy population. If we can achieve this, and it's an if, these are fairly audacious goals as always, the average user just needs to plug in their router and use the internet. Just like tap water today. You don't worry about boiling the water in Singapore. You don't worry about whether the river is clean or the pond and the wells are clean. You just open the tap, put a cup of water underneath it and drink. And you know that the government has filtered it upstream, has made sure that the pipes are clean, and made sure that when it comes out of your tap, it's drinkable. So the same way for the internet, we hope that as a government, we can filter out most of the dirt and disease from the pipes already, so that the internet is clean by the time the average user connects. The first thrust of the Safer Cyberspace Master Plan aims to defend our cyberspace at the onset by minimizing vulnerabilities in our internet architecture. We all know that the internet architecture, devices, endpoints, and enterprise applications were not always designed with security in mind. So we need to reduce the end user's exposure to known cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Maybe a simple initiative that I can talk about is what we call the cybersecurity labeling scheme. Just like when you go to the supermarket to buy food, there's a nutrition sticker on the side of every box of food that tells you what's in it and tells you whether it's high calorie, low calorie, high sugar, low sugar. We want to do the same thing for devices when you buy them in a IT shop. The scheme incentivizes developers to develop more secure products and set them apart from other competitors, and to make cybersecurity provisions transparent to the customer so that they can differentiate against poorly secured devices. Basically, when you go into a shop and you try and buy a baby camera, some of them will have the cybersecurity labeling scheme sticker and some won't. And even within the sticker, we have 4 different ranks. So there's 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, and 4-star, 4 being the best. This makes it an option for a consumer who does care about cybersecurity to act on that when they buy things. Today, it's applied to Wi-Fi routers mandatorily, smart home hubs by option, and we are expanding it to include more types of IoT devices. The second thrust aims to ensure swift detection and remediation of malicious cyber activities and mitigate the damage caused by threats. We're looking at artificial intelligence, we're looking at cyber fusion platforms to do threat detection and analysis. And we're even looking at doing an Internet of Things threat analytics platform. One of the smaller efforts we're looking at is building self-help resources and solutions for small enterprises to help them protect themselves. And the final thrust is to help our population respond to cyber threats by educating them, equipping them with the skills, and more importantly, helping them understand how to adopt cybersecurity practices, best practices. We've doubled down on our efforts to raise awareness, raise cyber hygiene, pushing out advisories and educating our population all the way from very young. And some of our efforts are fairly novel. We even have a little drama for young students to teach them or show them what would happen if their social media accounts were hacked. As Singapore and the wider Indo-Pacific region continue to digitalize, the growing frequency, sophistication, and consequence of cyber attacks will remain a reality of the security challenges confronting us. Cyber threat actors today are better organized, they have better resources, and possess more advanced capabilities. Consequently, they're much more capable and much more difficult to detect. Cooperation is essential. Singapore cannot do this on our own. No country can. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and we all need to play a part. Conferences like this are an important and useful opportunity for us to share insights on the cyber landscape and threats, to share our experiences and lessons learned, as well as to explore how we can work together to build up a capability to mount an effective cyber defense. I would say that the recent SolarWinds incident has been an extremely positive example of how countries come together to share knowledge and help each other amidst this unprecedented massive supply chain attack. But we can't stop here. Given the borderless nature of cyber and the speed at which threats are evolving, we have to move quickly, take concrete steps to work together, and build up our defenses to protect ourselves and hopefully create a safer and more secure cyberspace for everyone. Thank you.
Gaurav, Kirti, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I want to add to something that Gaurav said. The terrorist attacks in the physical space has diminished because of the pandemic, because of the restrictions, because of the lockdowns, the partial lockdowns. But terrorists are very active online during this period. Both terrorism and criminality, they have built huge capabilities during the pandemic. So I want to thank Gaurav, Kirti for highlighting this. I think his presentation set the tone for today's discussion. A very practical man, all of us would have gathered that his presentation is very insightful, very practical, man of great vision. And we thank you very much for that brilliant presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that I have already received a number of questions, but we are going to ask those questions at the end of our session. And I also want to especially greet the 5th president of the Maldives, the 5th executive president, President Wahid, who is also online, and he's going to pose a question. And I think that this is going to be a very interesting session today. Let me turn to our next speaker, our distinguished speaker from India, General Rajesh Pant. Lieutenant General Dr. Rajesh Pant is currently the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, or the Cyber Chief of the National Security Council Secretariat of India. In that capacity, he is responsible for coordinating all activities across multiple sectors to ensure a secure cyberspace of his nation. General Pant brings to the table an interesting mix of military operations, academic excellence, corporate governance, and cybersecurity wisdom. General, kindly share your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Professor Rohan, and greetings of the day to all the attendees of this very unique and relevant webinar. I must also thank the MC Divya and the promoters, Shamla, she's there, I'm told, and of course the Howard Baker Forum and DXC for having me here. I'm really, happy that the Indo-Pacific has now come into the spotlight in the cybersecurity geopolitical arena, because in the last couple of months we've been discussing at various levels. In fact, just last week we had the UNGGE, where India is one of the 25 countries, and we had some very interesting discussions on the 11 norms for responsible state behavior. And before that, we had the Singapore Cyber Week, the Israel Cyber Week, and focusing either on the ASEAN Plus or some other regional forums. But frankly, this is the first time that we are collectively talking of the Indo-Pacific region. So my compliments to the organizers for bringing it into importance. The Indo-Pacific is known for trying to become a free, open, and peaceful region. 2/3 of the world trade, we know, passes through that. And in one word, if I were to say about Indo-Pacific, it is all about collaboration. So I'm really happy that we have this excellent panel, and my mind was going back to the friends I have in each of these countries. Of course, starting from Professor Rohan, we were in a seminar earlier also, but I was going through the attendee list and I found Air Marshal Gagan Bulat Singla there. We did the National Defense course together. Then, of course, in Singapore, my friend David Koh is there, who was also in the signals for almost 40 years. And then in US, Chris Webbs, we kept discussing with each other as long as he was there in the CISA. In the UK, James Karen is a good friend of mine who had headed the NCSC till some time back. And in Japan, we have Takeshi-san. So in all the countries that are represented here, we have some very close associates handling the cybersecurity arena. So what I find is that the cyber domain, unlike land, sea, and air, where there are fixed boundaries and there are rules for, whether it is territorial waters or land boundaries or even the governance of the airspace and the jurisdiction, cyber is a very unique domain. Firstly, there are no boundaries. In fact, the boundaries are expanding. For example, today there are 17 billion IoT devices, and with 5G coming in the next 3 years, they say there's going to be 30 billion. So you can imagine the exponential increase in cyberspace that is going to take place. So that's a very unique characteristics of this. So expanding boundaries and diminishing rules. I hate to say it actually, but having attended the last UNGG, where we were trying to move towards some consensus, but we are also aware as to what happened in the 5th UN group of government experts, where the talks collapsed because the nations could not come to a consensus. And the reasons for that are known to all of you. You are reading the same literature that I read, that there is a lobby, an Eastern lobby, which is not very happy with the way the present internet is governed in terms of its root servers, in terms of the ICANN, in terms of IETF, etc. So they are trying to create what is now being called as a splinter net, a new internet, for which one of the nations has also proposed a new internet protocol to the International Telecommunications Union. So that is a worrying factor, because the whole concept of internet was to try and bring people together. And you just imagine if there are two internets, how adversely it will affect trade, education, social media, healthcare, all the aspects that are being used in the internet today will get adversely affected. And the worst is that the criminals are going to take advantage of it. As it is, attribution is such a major problem. In all forums, I always raise the aspect of attribution, because you can come to our National Informatics Centre here in Delhi, and they've got a very nice global map showing supposedly from where the attacks are coming from. And you find that 40% are coming from the US. And I call my US friends and show it to them that this is what the last IP, the Internet Protocol address is showing. So they hire a server somewhere, and it's not only the last IP. Now it's 3, 4, 5 hops. In fact, now they go inside the dark web also. So it's absolutely very, very difficult. And the payment, we always try and trace the money trail. The payment is being made in Bitcoins. So that is the scenario at the moment. As I said, the cyber domain is one of expanding boundaries and diminishing rules. There was a Tallinn manual which was written with a lot of effort after Estonia was attacked in 2007. Then Tallinn 2.0 also came out, which defined what is a cyber weapon, etc. But I find in all these international forums, people are not really serious about it. So this is one point of concern that I wish to flag. Let me also thank Gaurav Kirti for an excellent talk. You've actually covered everything, so left very little for me. So thank you very much. No wonder you are where you are. But as far as COVID-19 is concerned, we are all aware as to what happened. There was a sudden focus on work from home. The number of online transactions increased. In fact, India is all about numbers. We are among the top 3 cyber attacked nations in the world. One of the reasons is our sheer size in terms of the numbers. So we have 600 million internet users, 1.1 billion mobile phones. Last year, we lost 1.24 lakh crores due to cybercrime. And in fact, I remember in the Singapore Cyber Week, one of the delegates from Russia, if I'm not wrong, mentioned that the total loss in 2020 due to cybercrime was $6 trillion US. So that is what we are talking of, the seriousness of the issue. And the cyber criminals, as you're aware, the threat actors, as we call them, they are either individuals, organized criminal groups, insiders, cyber mercenaries, terrorists and activities, and of course, state-sponsored groups. So that is where it all comes down from. How do they come in? They come in through threat vectors, which are either aspects like phishing and social engineering, Trojans and infectors and ransomware and adware, etc. That's how they come in, and they take advantage of the vulnerabilities in people's processes and technology. So whatever you can do technology-wise, you can only do up to a certain level. Some of you who are in the technical field may be aware that in telecommunications, there is something called a 7-layer OSI model, Open Systems Interconnection Model. So, it's physical layer, data link, network, etc. And the last layer is the application layer. But I always say in forums that there is something called the 8th layer also. It's called the Newman's 8th layer officially, in fact, and that is the layer which is between our two ears. So unless that layer has a sense of seriousness in terms of cybersecurity, all the rest will fail. So these are the sheer hard truths of the cyber world, that as long as there are vulnerabilities, cyber attacks will take place. And as long as cyber attacks takes place, the attribution of these attacks is becoming more and more difficult. So with that, what do? We have to have a, of course, it starts off, as he said, an international team sport. We have to be together, and we have to have a whole of a nation approach. That is what we are professing in India, that there is a term called CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. So what we are saying is that everyone in the nation is responsible for national security in the cyber domain, whether it is individuals, whether it is business, whether it is academia, whether it is the government. Everyone is responsible because that's how it happens. One weakness is found in an organization of an individual. That's how the attacks takes place. You infect that individual, then you do a lateral spread, you escalate the privileges, you come to some higher privileges, and then either you're sitting there as a APT or you carry out whatever you're planning to do. So this is a whole of a nation approach that we are now professing, and we are soon going to come out with our national cybersecurity strategy. In fact, for the first time in Indian history, our Prime Minister announced on our Independence Day speech the importance of cybersecurity and its impact on society and economics. And he said that we will be coming out with a new strategy very soon. So this strategy is going to cover the entire ecosystem, whether it is, there are some actions you take place before an incident, some during an incident, and some after the incident. So before an incident is basically your education and awareness, your exercises, your training, capacity building, etc. The audits, VIPTs. During an incident, of course, is how you segregate and sequester, and then you do the remediation part, etc. So the entire process is being addressed, whether it is the audit, because when we went into details, we found that since you had to pay money for conducting an audit, a cyber audit, only the minimum boxes were being ticked, right? So what we've now done is to come out with the minimum baseline requirements, whether it is your industry or any other organization, that these are the minimum boxes that will have to be ticked in any cyber audit. And then of course, the empanelment of the auditor, etc. Then all of you are aware that the entire architecture of cybersecurity has changed now because of the WFH. So it's a distributed architecture, perimeter-less. Identity is a new perimeter, as they say. So it all boils down to what is termed as zero trust. So in times to come, zero trust is going to become more and more important. So, who am I? The multi-factor authentication, what are the apps that I'm using in my endpoint? What is my security system in the home router, etc. Not only the home router, the entire network now is going to be addressed, whether it is through a VPN or through a cloud. So, but this is a new architectural change that has taken place. Earlier, we were very happy organizations behind a firewall with our IDS, IPS, and anti-APT and behavioral analytics, everything. The organizations were very comfortably ensconced inside that. But with this distributed architecture, now the game has changed. So these are the things that are being done. The importance of digital forensics has suddenly become very important. In fact, 90% of the cases we find in cybercrime are related to mobile phones. So mobile forensics is something we discuss by the day. It's a battle of privacy versus security going on, and the use of apps. In fact, we did an analysis of a mobile phone, and we found that there are 15 different vectors in a mobile phone. So it's processor, it's hardware, it's memory, it's communication, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. Because I can, through a Bluetooth, I can infect your mobile phone. I can just cross you while I'm passing by and infect you, things like that. And then of course the apps, the pre-installed apps, which are called as the bundled apps, or the third-party apps, etc., that you download, and similarly things like that. So just protecting a mobile phone has become very important. So in addition to what has happened in the post-COVID era, there is a new focus on targeting the research organizations. That is what we saw in India, that some of our labs that were doing vaccine research were targeted basically for data theft, etc. The healthcare sector was targeted. Ransomware has suddenly become very important. All of us have to be very serious about this as to how to counter it. Because they, when I say they, I mean the criminals, they are aware of which is the sector which is going to pay them, which is under stress. So in a hospital, and there have been cases all around the world where they have absolutely paralyzed the hospital. And in fact, patients have had to be shifted till the time you make the payment. And we are aware of cities being targeted in US, etc., all over the world. So ransomware is an issue where I think this is one of the reasons, one of the subjects that we can all collaborate. As Gaurav also said, it's an international team sport, and we need to collaborate because these, now it's bots also that are being used, and the criminals are all over the world. So we had an attack in a bank in South India, where within a matter of 2 hours, from 22 different countries around the world, there were 20,000 transactions. It was ATM cash out in a period of 2 hours. So that is the organized and sophisticated level of our adversary. And unless we are together, I think we will, keep trying to find technological solutions which may not work. So a lot of bilateral issues are there, multilateral issues are there. We all, India's stated policy, of course, is to have a multi-stakeholder UN-led approach, which is taking time. So that is the harsh reality, that our UN aspirations are taking time. So people are wondering, should we go in for our regional forums, the Budapest conventions and the other forums? And sometimes it helps because you are aware in Sri Lanka when that church blast took place, it was because of your membership of the Budapest Convention that you could get details of the cyber criminals and trace it back. So since today you have no information, at least some information is better than no information. So that is what the situation is at the moment. Cyber attacks, as we all know, have gone up by 500%, and we have a long way to go. So at the national level, some of our structures have to come up, like threat intelligence for that matter. I find different organizations are taking threat intelligence from different actors. So there is a case that at a national level, we have threat intelligence, which you get from, let's say, the best people in the world, and then have a exchange and spread it to all the users, as he was also suggesting, give a clean pipe, etc. So those are some of the things at the top of my mind at the moment. And once again, let me compliment the organizers for bringing the Indo-Pacific together in the cyber domain. And this is a first in my compliments to you. Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you very much, General Pan. General mentioned something so significant. He said that India is the country that is the third highest targeted country. And I want to share with you that at the Indo-Pacific Centre, at today's inaugural event, we have representation from the United States, that is the most targeted country, and the UK, that is the second most targeted country, and India, that is the third most targeted country. So I want to thank General Pant for his presentation. General, I have seen you many times. We have spoken many times. You look as young as ever. I think that you are spending a lot of time, not only in cyberspace, but also in physical space, walking, training, hiking. Am I right?
Don't let the hair fool you. Between you and me, it's a digital world, it's 1 and 0.
General, thank you. Thank you once again for participating in this event. And thank you for heading a very important portfolio in the world at this time, because being a cybersecurity chief of India is a huge responsibility. So we all wish you good luck in the work that you're doing. Let me now turn to Japan, to Hirohide, who is from, in my view, the most important ministry in Japan, the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry. Hirai, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your excessive kind introduction. So it is my great honor to make a speech at this Indo-Pacific centers. And I will also thank to Scott Campbell for asking me to participating into today's webinar. Having said, I would like to start my speech by offering deepest condolences to all killed or suffered from the COVID-19 virus. I still cannot believe this invisible virus has changed the whole world and our entire lifestyle in such a short period. This tough situation has been thought to be just a story of science fiction movie, and we in the real world have nothing to do with. We are not allowed to meet our friends or family freely, and sometimes are not allowed to go outside our houses. We work online without seeing colleagues or customers directly, shop online without touching merchandise nor paying at checkout, and our kids take lessons online without seeing teachers or friends directly. Papers and TV report and highlight all the tragedies associated with the change of these lifestyles. Yes, it is true that the expansion of COVID-19 has brought a variety of difficulties to us. We all are in a very tough time, which we have never experienced. Yet, if you see the situation with a distance and think twice, you will feel that most of the challenges or changes were predicted, or rather publicized as a rosy future of coming digital age. This is why we think these changes are irreversible, as the trend of DX is. In fact, under the expansion of COVID-19, remote working and the other digital working styles have rapidly increased in Japan, like all the other nations. Having said, however, sadly speaking, I have to point out that this is a very reason or background that attack surfaces have increased so rapidly. Actually, before COVID-19 widespread around the globe, we have already seen a variety of serious cyber attacks in the world. Well-known serious damages should be the cases of WannaCry in 2017. That is exemplified a case that a hospital in the UK received serious damages by WannaCry. In Japan too, several enterprises have also received damages, which brought a complete stoppage of its factory operation in some cases. One of the companies was infected with WannaCry through a business partner in Europe. WannaCry brought a serious damages over borderlines. Though we have already known seriousness of cyber threat, many companies, especially SMEs, thought that they would not be targeted by cyber attackers. However, this was not true, unfortunately. The Osaka Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the biggest regional chamber of commerce in Japan, researched the reality about cyber attacking SMEs in 2018. The chamber gave 3 months free monitoring service to 30 small companies in Osaka. At first, monitored 30 companies didn't believe that they would even receive cyber attacks. Against their groundless belief, a result of the monitoring showed that all companies, not some companies, all of them received cyber attacks in 3 months. In addition, 5 out of 30 were seriously compromised, and to their surprise, they were used as attacking bases for attackers to intrude their business partners. Cyber threats have already been real for not only the big enterprises, but also SMEs, and the supply chain attack had already been widespread by that time. COVID-19 made this serious situation exacerbated seriously, both quantity-wise and quality-wise. After the start of COVID-19's full-scale expansion in March 2020 in Japan, the number of incidents reported to JP-CERT, which is a Japanese national CERT, has dramatically increased in Japan. Plus, we are witnessing that attacking patterns are getting much more sophisticated. The network penetration threat, which is an attacking style to use vulnerabilities in VPN products with high skills, has been getting major concern. Since it is not easy for a company attacked through this style to detect and recognize their attacks, their damages tend to be really serious. Ransomware attacks are getting more complicated and strategic. The new pattern of ransomware is not only attacking encrypted data of the target organization, but also stealing them before they were encrypted and expose it gradually, if the organization would refuse payment. We name the new attacking style double extortion. A company which receives their attack has to choose a violation of the compliance principle or loss of credibility from customers whose information would be exposed to the public. Because of the COVID-19, enterprises have accelerated deeper integration of their own information systems among global branches as in order to compensate for decrease of overseas business trips. This actions has resulted in the increase of the cases of the systems compromised through overseas branches. One of the defense-related companies in Japan was actually attacked through its overseas branch, and its data was stolen in 2019. In this case, at first, the attacker built an attacking base at the company's branch outside of Japan, and then it used stealth ways to penetrate the company's major facilities in Japan. To make business leaders understand these new and serious trends on cybersecurity, METI, my organization, released the alert about a recent situation and recommendation for risk mitigation on December 18, 2020. To deal with the situation that cyber attacks is getting harder and harder, there are 3 basic approaches. The first, each organization has to make utmost effort to protect and save themselves from cyber attacks by using every possible means. METI has released a variety of tools, for example, the Cybersecurity Management Guideline, the Practice Collection for Cybersecurity, and so on, to support private companies' own treatments for cybersecurity. Regarding the Cybersecurity Management Guideline, it has already been downloaded by companies around 100,000 times. The second, we should promote collective activity to tackle cyber attacks, especially to protect our supply chain. Attackers try to use weak points in supply chain composed from many stakeholders. So it is not enough to protect it by single entity. To articulate risk points in complicated supply chain and promote collective activities in an industries, METI released the Cyber Physical Security Framework, so-called CPSF, in April 2019. METI has also facilitated each industry sector to make a sectoral security guideline based on CPSF, such as Automotive Security Cybersecurity Guideline, or Building Cybersecurity Guideline, and etc., etc. In addition, Japanese industry launched a new consortium for cybersecurity cooperation on 1st November 2020, so-called Supply Chain Cybersecurity Consortium. We call it SC3. The third, actual support service to all type of enterprises is more effective than just showing supporting tools, especially in the case of SMEs, to secure supply chains. Many SMEs cannot pay much for cybersecurity services. We need to develop cheap and effective cybersecurity services for SMEs. To create a new type of cybersecurity services for SMEs in Japan, METI has operated Cybersecurity Supporters Project from 2019. In this project, insurance companies, security vendors, and local chamber of commerce formed a joint ventures to provide monitoring and rescuing services for SMEs. There were 8 teams have provided services, and over 1,000 SMEs received services in 2019. There were 128 cases that teams gave the actual cyber rescue services. One of these services succeeded in saving a small company from over $500,000 damage. Based on these successful outcomes, several teams have already succeeded in starting commercial services through experiences in this project. At the end of my presentation, I would like to share my concern about the recent cyber environment with you. With or without an impact of COVID-19, the trend of cyberspace expansion is inevitable. We have to be ready for our new lives in new world. Unfortunately, we have not yet succeeded in establishing a new treatment system to cope with the ever stronger this enemy. It means that we are on the edge. Either we would be able to enjoy a creative and efficient society with a secure cyberspace, or we would go back to pre-digital age business circumstances with failure to contain massive cyber attacks. It is one of the great paradoxes of our time that the very technologies that empower us to do great job can also be used to undermine us and as inflict great harm. A famous world leader put the cyber technology in this way. Ladies and gentlemen, who do you think he is? The answer is President Obama. Do you remember when then President Obama delivered this speech? It was June 2014, when he called for the cooperation between private companies and government at the Cybersecurity Summit. Let me quote some phrases from that speech. Whether it's phishing or botnets, spyware or malware, and now ransomware, these attacks are getting more and more sophisticated every day. So we've got to be just as fast and flexible and nimble in constantly evolving our defenses. The cyber world is sort of the wild, wild west. And to some degree, we are asked to be the sheriff. When something like Sony happens, people want to know what can government do about this. By necessity, that means government has its own significant capability in the cyber world. But then people, right, likely ask, well, what safeguards do we have against the government intruding on our privacy? And it's hard. And it constantly evolves because the technology so often outstrips whatever rules and structures and standards have been put in place, which means the government has to be constantly self-critical, and we have to be able to an open debate about it. We all know what we need to do. We have to build stronger defense and disrupt more attacks. We have to make cyberspace safer. We have to improve cooperation across the board. And by this way, this is not just here in America, but internationally. After all, we are just getting started. Let me reiterate here. This is the excerpt from the US President's speech, not in 2021, but in 2014. Let's face it, the current situation is getting worse than 7 years ago. Even though President Obama said we were getting started, the cold number shows that we have not. Now is the time we would seriously cooperate to build a new system to tackle malicious cyber activities. I look forward to discussing and conducting for it with like-minded friends in the world. However hard it would be, we needed to use this tough time as a positive opportunity to build a new society. Thank you once again for your attention.
Hirai-san, let me thank you very much for sharing those words of experience and words of wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have one more presentation, that is Anatomy of a Cyber Attack and Technology Demonstration from Mark Hughes from the United Kingdom. But before he does that, I want to have a Q&A session, a very brief Q&A session. And because we are running out of time, and the first question is directed to Gaurav Kirti, and the question is from the 5th Executive President of the Maldives, President Dr. Wahid. And the question is, does the geopolitical tension between US and China have a spillover effect on cybersecurity?
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for the question. And I will upfront tell you that this answer is going to be extremely difficult to give clearly. We're all trying to think about what the last 5 years has meant in terms of geopolitical tensions and what the next few years might bring in terms of the relationship between US and China. So much like many other people in this room, I don't know for certain what that will be. But I can say one thing for sure. Whatever has happened in the last few years has elevated cybersecurity and digital risks and technology to the political level. When I started getting into cybersecurity, the idea that the President of the United States would be talking about a specific 5G vendor and talking about specific vulnerabilities in that 5G vendor's provisions was unthinkable. Cybersecurity for 5G and telecommunications technologies was not a political problem. It was barely a technology problem at that point. But today it is. So today, if we start talking about 5G, immediately questions are asked about Huawei, immediately questions are asked about other companies that are providing services, and it is a cybersecurity issue. Whatever has happened now is here to stay. The questions that citizens, that companies, that countries are asking themselves about whom they can trust are becoming extremely difficult to answer. Can you trust a technology by a vendor that is in a country? The fact that countries like United States were banning technologies from China meant that they are making a certain policy position that they did not trust those technologies. So then for the rest of us, smaller countries like Singapore and your own, how do we navigate this tension? Who do we trust? The answer, if it is binary, is difficult. If it is either the US or the Chinese technologies or Russians or Indian or whatever else technology, it's very difficult because that's not ideal for the world. If we are forced to pick a certain tech ecosystem and not explore the full benefits of what technologists, agnostic to their origin, have to offer, then I fear that we're not getting the best value for the world. Singapore's approach, and I hope it is an approach that we can explain in future, is to think about what are the objective, neutral, technically designed standards that we can all agree to assure ourselves that we can have trust, even if the components may be untrusted. And this is increasingly going to be important for the next bound of technology. What I mean by that is, even if I don't trust my email application or my messaging application, can I layer on top of that some form of encryption that will allow me to build a trusted communication channel on top of an untrusted network? And increasingly, as we apply this to other tools, other systems, other technologies, we hope that we can have an objective, neutral, and technically grounded conversation about trust for cybersecurity. This then changes the dynamics from one with geopolitical leanings to one which is a much more technically objective conversation. And I think, as Professor Rohan said, I'm a very practical person. I know that Singapore is in no position to solve the tensions between US and China, but at the same time, I need to move forward. And I need to move forward using the best of technologies that are available to us from the world. And if that means we need to layer on top of it some systems, some components, some elements which allow us to trust it, then we will explore developing those. And I think my hope for small countries is that we can all work together to push a more objective and technically based conversation so that we can avoid getting caught up in the geopolitics of it, which is a big issue. And it's not just limited to cybersecurity, but the spillover applications are basically that there is a decreasing trust in different tech ecosystems, and we need to find a way to bridge that. Thank you.
We have another question for Gaurav Kirti, that is the analogies of drinking water and nutrition labels were especially useful and creative. I'm interested in knowing what more can and is being done to make our netizens less susceptible to social engineering-based cybercrimes in particular, both in technical and awareness terms. This question is from Anuradha Rao.
Thank you so much. Actually, I was asked to give a speech a little while ago at a conference called Black Hat, which is primarily for hackers. And in that speech, I spoke about 3 different sources of my learning. I learned from very unconventional sources. The first was water, filtration, and sanitation. The second was automotive manufacturing. And the third was food, nutrition systems. And so that's why those analogies came up. On the water one, and this is where it's relevant to Anuradha's question about how we can educate our users. If you rewind back to the 1300s and the 1400s in Europe, in order to get water, you dig a well, you'd scoop up the water, and you try to boil it and then drink it. Occasionally, people didn't boil it enough, or they forgot to boil it and they drank it, and then they die of all sorts of horrible diseases. Eventually, the problem became bad enough that they were spreading it to their whole villages, farms were dying out, and kings and queens at that point thought it was a bit ridiculous. And so they put up posters telling people, boil your water before drinking it. Do not drink dirty water. If you see dead animals, don't drink the water. Why do I raise this as an example? Because if you think about cybersecurity today, what am I telling my citizens? Use strong passwords, use 2-factor authentication. I'm putting all of the burden of using digital technology safely on the user. It's your fault that you died from drinking the dirty water. It's your fault that your password was too weak. But after the 1800s, they basically decided that this was a silly approach. And a smarter approach was just to build pipes, clean the water upstream, pipe it to the farms, and then let people drink from the taps or irrigate their plants with the tap water. And so this system of upstream filtration and irrigation through kind of the water networks was a very interesting transformation, because it meant that now all of the diseases that they saw in terms of poor hygiene practices on the ground by users were no longer a problem, because they made drinking clean water the easier option for users. Now to dig a well required a lot of hard work. Why dig a well when you can just turn on your tap? If we apply that same concept to cybersecurity, what we're trying to do is, why go through all of the effort of building your own firewalls, installing this, applying that, using that password manager. If we can try and clean things up upstream, as well as make cybersecurity as simple as possible. The other example from automation is that in the past, in order to drive a car, you had to know what a carburetor is. And those of us who learned driving in manual days would learn how to do gear shifts and why gear shifts matter and how to do it properly. Today, to drive a car, you really literally just press a button called start, and you press the same button called stop, and that's all you need to understand about how the car works. It does everything else for you. How can we move cybersecurity from the complicated engineering, user-laden responsibilities that it is today to a system where it is easy by design, it is easier by design, and that we do most of the work upstream to filter the water for them? So that's what I meant by those analogies. And I think what we're doing in Singapore is to make things as easy as possible by filtering it out upstream at the ISP levels to make sure that the worst types of attacks don't filter down. And even the routers, when you connect to your home Wi-Fi network, if we can ensure that routers are designed with security in mind, no common passwords, a system of patching, actually that means that when the average user plugs in their laptop to their home Wi-Fi network, we can be assured that it's relatively safe because we've done the hard work for them. Thanks.
Thank you for very instructive response by Gaurav. Let me now ask General Pant to respond to a question by Dr. Pawan Dugal. And his question is, what kind of cybersecurity legal and policy approaches need to be adopted by the Indo-Pacific state stakeholders to build a sound and secure cyberspace in the Indo-Pacific region? General Pant.
Thank you, Professor Rohan. And my short answer is that we need cyber lawyers like Dr. Pawan Dugal to frame some of the new acts that we have in mind. He's a friend of mine and a very renowned cyber lawyer practicing in the Supreme Court of India. Having said that, you see, I can tell you the Indian position that we were one of the first off the block as far as the IT Act is concerned. We formed an Information Technology Act in the year 2000, and then there was an amendment in 2008. But since then, the landscape has changed very fast. There were no cryptocurrencies earlier, there was no ransomware, digital forensics was not there. So there is time now, it is opportune to have what some countries have enforced as a Cybersecurity Act, because of the spectrum of cybercrime that is taking place and the scale of cybercrime taking place. So these things, as I said, are part of our strategy, but there is definitely a need to make the legal side also match with the pace at which the forensics and the technical activities of the criminals are taking place. You see, today there is a big gap. Let me tell you that when I see the statistics in our government portals, for an average of 1,000 crimes reported, only about 15, that is 1/5, are converted into the first information reports, as they are called, the FIRs. And even out of those 15, the number that are actually prosecuted is quite less. And one of the reasons, besides many others, is the the chain of custody of the digital forensics that is involved, and the admissibility of that, and the legal clauses of that. So how does this match up with the pace of things is something very important. We have to find a way out of this, and I think that's a great question by Dr. Dugal, Pawan Dugal, and this needs to be tackled by different nations on a war footing. Thank you.
We have a question by Suresh Gunasinghan. And I would like to direct this question to Scott. The question is, cybersecurity also includes the false narrative. After alleging following the recent American presidential elections, how does one protect oneself against false narratives which are pushed through social media? Does everything have to be fact-checked? And going one step further, how does one assure that the fact check is the truth? Scott.
I don't think there is any way to know if the fact check is truthful or not. This is a huge problem for us, and as you've seen from news coverage over the last few months, and with the attack on our Capitol, much of it fomented and planned online. That social media, as some of our speakers have said, is a force for great good, but also it creates opportunities for great mischief. And we have not figured out how to handle that. Our Congress, our lawmakers are well behind the curve on this one. And of course, the technology is moving so fast, and the opportunities for mischief and worse are so great that we are really behind the curve. So I don't have an answer for you other than to say that this is a great struggle going on right now, trying to figure out whether a few corporations can censor the President of the United States. A lot of us would probably agree he ought to be censored, but it was interesting once they did take him off of Facebook and Twitter and all of that. The private companies made those decisions to do so. That there were protests filed by the president, by the Prime Minister of Germany, and by and the UK and other places, who saw the risk of private corporations silencing the president or the head of a country. So I don't have a good answer for you, but it certainly is a challenge that we all face, and we're all going to have to deal with it internally. In a democracy like ours, with our constitutional protections, it's extremely difficult to monitor and manage those kinds of communications. And I'm not sure how we're going to get it done, but sorry, I don't have a better answer. Thank you.
Scott Campbell, thank you very much. Let me share with you that Singapore has moved forward. Singapore has created online act to regulate what is happening, fake news, that is Online Falsehoods and Manipulations Act. Singapore's Minister of Home Affairs and Law, Minister Shanmugam, has moved forward in this direction. And I want to share with all of you that unless we have a legal and a policy framework to regulate what is happening, that we are going to suffer in a post-truth world. But Scott, we understand that the US system has some limitations in moving in this direction, but we are very grateful that you and all the speakers, our distinguished panelists, shared their views. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last presentation, and that is a presentation by Mark Hughes from the United Kingdom. He's from DXC Technology. He's going to speak to us about a recent ransomware attack that DXC Technology had responded. And Mark Hughes is DXC Technology's Senior Vice President and General Manager of Security. He's responsible for the company's global security organization and offerings, including advisory services, managed security services, identity management, monitoring, and information assurance. Mark Hughes, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and a very warm welcome, and thank you for having me today, a very early morning my time here in London. There's a couple of things. I was billed to be a demonstration, and I'm not going to do a demonstration because they always go wrong, and not only that, we don't have much time left. So I thought I'd just share some thoughts around this particular incident that happened to DXC in the last year, around obviously ransomware, as has been said. But I wanted to start by reflecting on a few things that many of the speakers have said. And that is the realization, regardless of the type of attack, and I've spent many years in this space, is that there are now interventions required at aggregation points in the IT system that we have built over the years. And it's only really by addressing these things on multiple layers, and specifically aggregate those points where aggregation happens, then where where those interventions can be done that create a disproportionate impact in terms of being able to protect what's actually going on. And I'll come back to that theme in a minute or two, but let me just start by talking a bit about what happened to DXC last July. So we have a subsidiary in our business called Exchanging, and it serves the insurance market extensively. And last July, in fact, specifically the 4th of July, which was a day which for many people in America they remember very well, and certainly we won't forget it in a hurry. On the 4th of July, what happened was that we experienced a ransomware incident. And the first thing to note about this incident was that the alerting of the actual incident itself was not in itself a ransomware event. The alert that we actually picked up was using what's often described as a greyware piece of software called Cobalt Strike, which can often be used, it can actually be used non-nefariously, but threat actors also use it as well. And that alerted, and we alerted that using a product called CrowdStrike Overwatch, a Falcon product. And the point there was that that alert immediately led a threat hunt team response in our business. And what I concluded at that point was that we were most likely in a situation where a threat actor was trying to do this as a precursor to create the command and control environment to then subsequently be able to deploy ransomware into this particular environment. So that was quite an important situation. So what I then did was that we then moved very quickly into a containment scenario. The anatomy of ransomware, most people know and understand very well. The key is to try and contain the situation as quickly as possible. And there are a few things there that I'll come out when I talk about lessons learned, which are very, very important at that point. So our incident management process kicked in. And what we discovered at that point was where we had seen Cobalt Strike being implemented, we had not yet witnessed an actual ransomware incident. What we had witnessed, though, is the threat actor preparing the ground to actually deploy the actual malicious software itself. And that included, for example, a ransomware note and other types of artifacts associated with these types of incidents. But we then moved very quickly, literally in a matter of minutes, to moving to containment. And I've already said that this is a subsidiary of DXC, so we were in some respects fortunate that the subsidiary could be isolated and contained very quickly. Now that doesn't necessarily follow that it has to be a subsidiary to be quick. Well-rehearsed plans for containment mean that various parts of networks and IT ecosystems can be contained quite quickly. But that was absolutely essential, because essentially what happened thereafter was, whilst the threat actor had been successful in gaining a foothold onto this particular environment, what they had not been able to do was successfully deploy the malicious software itself. They had deployed a very limited pieces of malware, in fact, enough to be able to investigate subsequently. And there was a very limited amount of minor disruption. This particular environment contains many thousands of hosts, and single digits of hosts were actually impacted and encrypted. There was obviously, inevitably, I'd rather have had it that there was no encryption, but that was the case, but in a way in which wasn't impacting the ability for the business to trade. Having contained the environment, having found that there was this malware present, we very quickly then moved into two streams. One was the investigation, and the second was the restoration. And the investigation was important to run those two things concurrently, on the basis that one has a direct impact on the other. In other words, the ability to be able to harvest the actual malware, to be able to then find and get, as we do, we have extensive relationships with not just law enforcement and other various government agencies, but also with the big security software vendors, to be able to reverse engineer the artifacts that we had, to be able to produce the updates, to upload to VirusTotal and get and see where we could find any additional intelligence on it. It was very important that we had that, and we therefore had to instigate that investigation very rapidly. But equally, that then meant that we could then have the ability to be able to restore on the basis that we knew we were going to restore into an environment that was clean. Interestingly, the other thing that I decided to do very rapidly was to immediately talk to our customers. And when I say immediately, in a matter of hours. And that was quite unusual. And it still is quite a difficult thing to do. It's a big decision to come to very early on when things are often very, very uncertain. The impact, though, there was essentially what I was doing. I was crowdsourcing, for want of a better description, threat intelligence from many people who I know very well in the industry, who were extremely helpful to me, law enforcement included, and other cybersecurity agencies, to help me work out whether there are any other indicators of compromise that they may have seen related to this type of threat actor. As it turned out, our investigation demonstrated that both the malware itself was novel and the threat actor was unclassified and unknown, and the subsequent investigation which we conducted showed that to be the case. So that was basically the anatomy of what went on. So essentially the event itself was very short-lived. And in fact, the subsequent full forensic examination recognized that the threat actor had only been in the environment for less than 24 hours before successfully launching the attack. And subsequently to the attack itself, the restoration, we were managed to bring services back online because we'd taken the precaution of containing the environment. We uncontained, if you want, the environment, again, within approximately 12, 14 hours of the actual event itself. So it seems maybe on the face of it to be, to a certain extent, not a serious event, but I thought it was an extremely serious event. And the reason why I wanted to share it with you today, because there are a number of things which we learned from it. The first thing is the usual landscape, or the usual NIST type framework that we're all very familiar with, the importance of following that and of rehearsing it. And what I mean by that is I have the ability to be able to make the decision to contain the environment within minutes. As soon as we identified the fact that Cobalt Strike was present in the environment, we immediately took the precaution to contain the environment. What I mean by containment was essentially to drop all the access from the environment and to essentially split the production and non-production environments away from each other, even more than they usually are, as well as ensuring that any untrusted connectivity in amongst the business was reinforced through even less trust than there normally exists. And that had the ability then to completely thwart the ability of the threat actor to be able to move around the environment and to indeed then deploy the malware itself. I was extremely concerned at that point that the threat actor would use the capability, if there was any external connectivity, to be able to trigger more malware. Now, that is not a dead cert for a positive result. What can happen is that the malware itself can contain a mechanism to detonate even without necessarily C2 connectivity, but in this case, that wasn't the case. So follow the playbook is pretty important. But a few things that I would go on to say, which I suppose come to my most important point from the experience that we had last year. And I know that this might seem quite technical, what's on the screen at the moment, but I just wanted to share with you today some of my learnings from being involved in not just this incident, but I probably am involved in maybe 5 or 6 a month of serious significant incidents that are impacting organizations that maybe are using some of our services. And that's because we are a system integrator and we provide services to many customers. And those customers can become impacted through the way in which their estates are managed. And so the first thing I would say is that almost always in every situation that I see, and I would count the incident I've just described to you within that, is that the understanding of the estate that an organization is actually responsible for is something that almost always most organizations don't really know. And that is an immediate impediment to be able to actually secure the environment. In order to overcome that, organizations really do have to have the ability to understand what is going on across their estate. And if I look at the checklist that I have put up here, which is my ready little checklist, this is no surprise, these things here, they're very common to every cybersecurity agency, will cover the same things. But that number 6, actually understanding what the assets are in the organization and be able to then actually discover what's in the organization and constantly update it, is probably the thing that most organizations really struggle with. And what I'll go on to say is that often that is not a technical issue. More often than not, it has a lot to do with how organizations work between themselves. Different departments are often uncooperative with each other. There'll be digital and parts of the enterprise doing activity which is independent from mainstream IT, or there may be subsidiaries that have never really been integrated and are left to their own devices, even though the risk that is being carried is not being carried by the subsidiary, is now being carried by the parent. And I find almost always when asking most of the people that I interact with on a daily basis, that they have a limited and often quite scary limited understanding of actually what exists in their environment. And no surprise, threat actors are exploiting those very things. SolarWinds absolutely proved the fact that where organizations, threat actors can, they will go after that very piece, that very thing which most organizations find really hard to do. But even if, given that is the case, there are still these other things which I have written up here, which again, most organizations struggle, I would say, with one key thing, which is coverage. All of these tools, there are many, many tools out there which are becoming easier and easier to deploy. The issue is they're often just not deployed comprehensively enough. And so far too often in security, what I find is organizations will spend many, many months often agonizing over a decision of a particular tool, when actually a lot of the tools are, the difference between them is not profound. But the bigger issue is actually extending the deployment to get the visibility. Because when it comes, as I have given in the example, to ransomware, time is hugely of the essence. And being able to have that early detection and then being able to respond to it is essential. But a few things that I just finish off on. If I were to pick my top 2 or 3, Active Directory would sit right in there. Again, organizations often find their Active Directory environment, the directories which we all know and we're all logged on to if you want, and our identities are managed from, that environment needs to be, a threat actor will always want to try and penetrate that environment to gain access privileges, to now have the freedom to move around a particular environment. And again, most organizations will not spend time cleaning up or paying attention to their Active Directory. And it always mystifies me that that is the case when every threat actor always goes after that environment. I won't go through each and every one of them, but I will just finish by saying, first things first, I'm afraid large organizations represent big aggregation points in the IT ecosystem. They often serve many millions of customers. Therefore, there is an obligation, and let's not get into the debate about who's a victim in this situation. There is simply an obligation on large organizations to actually get busy and understand what they are actually responsible for, and understand their supply chain and who they are dependent upon. And back to my second point that I raised about governance and that interconnectivity. And then finally, making sure that whether it's a cybersecurity agency of Singapore, whether it's a National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK or the CISA in the US, or whichever agency it happens to be, basically they all boil down to a similar set of controls. And the controls need to be deployed consistently and at scale to be able to get the coverage to become the early warning device that allows an organization like ours to be able to talk about an incident where we had an incident, but we were able to contain it quickly, rather than suffering what often happens with ransomware, which is complete loss of any service at all for potentially many days or even weeks at a time. And with that, I'll hand it back over. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mark Hughes, for sharing a real life incident with all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, let me now conclude the inaugural event of the Indo-Pacific Centre. I want to pay a tribute to Shamila Gunasingham, a beautiful lady who is the managing director of the Global Law Alliance. It was her precious father's vision to create the Indo-Pacific Centre. Let me also express our appreciation to Scott Campbell and Bill Deckelman. I want to thank DXC for their visionary, collective, and decisive leadership, for having organized, for having partnered, for having worked with us to inaugurate, to ensure that we have such a topical conference during the pandemic. Finally, distinguished speakers and participants, thank you very much. And may this event create the path for greater events for humanity. On behalf of everyone, let me once again thank all of you for your participation. Thank you.